Let's welcome Mike Scofield.
Thank you. This is an intensely visual presentation, so if you want to slide to the center, you may be able to see it a little bit better, and that helps also. Think back to 1895, and the church is growing. The brethren are establishing schools all over the place. They need teachers, they need more ministers, but they need to train those people. And they need to establish in the union that we're in a training school. And I use those words very deliberately. So the union conference president went out and he found, someone tipped him off as to a farm that was available real cheap about 4 miles from town in the railroad depot. And they bought this property and they laid out where they were going to establish a school. They didn't know that they used the word college, but they were going to start with at least 3 buildings. There existed a barn and a farmhouse there. And so the first building, they lay out some streets. The first building is the admin building. They constructed it out of wood because we didn't have a long planning horizon, because we didn't know how soon Christ would come. The cafeteria is in the basement. There is no competition within 4 miles, so they can fix any food they want. The second building was the girls' dorm. It was built out of wood. I didn't put in the fire escape, but that was an essential element. The third, and the boys slept in tents. And this was not an uncommon thing. In fact, at Collegedale, the boys endured 3 winters living in tents before a dorm was built. The third building is a church, and it's built out of wood, and it has a certain New England quality to it. And then, of course, we have to have some faculty homes. And then, finally, we construct a building a dorm for the men. And you notice it's on the opposite side of the campus as the dorm for the women. It's not just symbolism. And then, and it's a big event when we got a powerhouse and we got electricity. And generally, if you look at the history of many of these schools, accreditation was a big event, but getting electricity was big too. And then they didn't have to use candles in the dorm rooms, and there was a constant threat of fire. And then we built a gymnasium for the Saturday night marches. Okay. And a science building, and what is that? That's a press and a bindery, and some apartments for the single teachers, and then a furniture shop, and finally a cafeteria. And there still is no competition within 4 miles. And so this was kind of how schools grew. And there were actually 4 colleges where the boys, at some point in the history of the college, slept in tents. The 1905 Adventist concept of a college, and actually none of these were really colleges quite then, was rural, a well-bounded campus, full-time resident students, full-time faculty, all of them Adventist, and I'll say isolated and pure. No radios, no student-owned cars. And back in 1890, and they were all rural. We would never deliberately locate a college in the city center where people live. Now, this happens to be the School of Business at the Virginia Commonwealth University, downtown Richmond. And I know because I did a lecture on the 3rd floor over on the left. And that's definitely urban, but we would never do that as we established these schools. The formation of most of these schools occurred in a 30-year period, but what is interesting, if you look carefully at their history, they did not start to offer BAs until after 1910. So they were junior colleges or super academies or whatever you want to call them. But they all started about the same time, except for La Sierra. This is the faculty of Healdsburg College in 1889. On the right, having a Napoleonic complex, is Elder George Granger, who was the principal of the school. This is the graduating class of Healdsburg College, 1903. I want you to look at those faces. Every last one of them is dead. And I'm sure a number of them had someone tell them or got the impression that they probably would never marry because Christ would come before that happened, okay? And most of them lived full, productive lives, and they're gone. How they got together is a mystery to me, because the handbook says, among other things, in 1905, all students must refrain from flirtation, courting, and all appearances of the same during the college year. Gentlemen must not escort ladies upon the street or to or from public gatherings. Now that is silent about private gatherings. But, so it was very strict. If you went to Walla Walla in 1906, you could take hygienic dressmaking class. Okay. Walla Walla had a strong MV society. The leaders studiously sat on the lawn and read the youth instructor. This is obviously posed. In Tennessee, Rochelle Philman began teaching. Some of you know her? Began teaching in 1909. I see quite an age disparity in the students there, okay? 1909, that is 100 years ago. The typical college day was classes in the morning and hard work in the afternoon. In fact, they expected faculty to work right alongside of the students, either farming or constructing buildings or clearing the lumber in the woods, which is what these students from SMC were doing. The focus of career and a lot of other aspects of the culture was upon denominational service. All these people were training to be of service to the church. And part of how they earned their way through school was being call porters or literature salesmen in the summer. And this is a class from 1927 in SMC. Notice there were also women that scares me, women going door to door selling books, but they did. In 1927, H.H. Hamilton left from being the president of Southern Missionary, or whatever the college was at the time, and went up to Washington to be president of Washington Missionary College. The entire campus walked to the depot to see him off on the train. This, to me, is a sense of community. It's also a sense of isolation. We would never all go out to Ontario Airport to see anybody off, you know. So, and that consisted of 140 students and 28 faculty. I think that's just a remarkable event. The Missionary Volunteer Society kept our focus on mission service in the future. Everyone, and it even permeated my experience at La Sierra in 1965 through 1969, that I thought seriously about denominational service. The theology department at PUC was really called Department of Religion and Evangelism, okay? And these ministers were all expected to be evangelists, and here they are ready to go out and inflict their meetings upon the neighboring communities in Napa and Sonoma County. But before they could do that, before they could conduct meetings, they have to know how to conduct the song service. And so here they are learning how to direct the singing. Okay. Every school had a map like this. You remember? With where their alumni are serving overseas. This was really the focus of the whole system. Parallel to the education system was another education enterprise for nurses. And every sanitarium had its own nursing school and kind of grew its own. And I have trouble, my Latin, I have trouble with this word. I stumble over it. It should be sanitaria. But anyway, by 1940, a few of the sanitaria had closed and a few had opened. After a while, they started affiliating with the nearest college, and eventually rolled their programs into a more formal academic program. My mother went through that kind of routine. She got her nursing certificate at New England Sanitarium and then went over to AUC, where she spent 2 more years and finished up with a degree in English. She was school nurse, she was first aid teacher, prayer band leader, Sabbath school teacher, and valedictorian. She never let me forget the part of the valedictorian, especially when I brought my grades home. The old campus model was a concrete image, and it still influences how constituents and trustees think about what a college is or should be. And it really constrains our business model. Well, the scope of this presentation today is going to be a whole bunch of liberal arts colleges or generally liberal arts. But what is going to be out of scope is Loma Linda, Andrews, Oakwood, and Canadian Union College. The first 3 have special status, and I would describe them as too big to fail. If I'd used that expression a year ago, you wouldn't understand what I'm saying. But they hold a special relationship to the General Conference, and they will not fail. The others we will examine in greater detail. The challenges with this topic is that it is broad and complex, and I'm just scratching the surface. In fact, it is so complex that many decision makers will deny the complexity and focus on the easy questions and the easy answers, or revert to some inappropriate cognitive techniques, and I will discuss some of those when we get to what the qualities that I'm looking for in a board of trustees. I am not an educator, so I ran this by a whole bunch of people, and I am indebted to their assistance and their critiques. Henry Felder, particularly in North Carolina, was very responsive to my emails, as was Richard Osborne, who spoke here on this topic not too long ago. And in fact, Richard Osborne's paper, Facing Our Challenges, February 2007, is still an awesome discussion of all the many more issues than I'll raise today. He just has a very impressive capacity for researching and putting the ideas together. We're also plagued by some ambiguous terms. Now, when I was gathering data, the term enrollment is inherently ambiguous because it could be full-time equivalent or it could be warm bodies. Do you include the evening programs? Do you include the extension programs at Loma Linda? Do we include the students in Thailand and Saudi Arabia? So you have to, and because of these ambiguities, as personnel change in filling out the forms, the numbers may bump once in a while. Faculty is equally ambiguous. Are you just talking about full-time permanent, which is characterizes most of the faculty at PUC, or the adjunct faculty, the people that have other jobs and just come in and teach in the evening, which is what we see at La Sierra a lot. And then this term Christian education, which always annoyed me when I was in academy. Is it just our schools, or would you say that Point Loma and Westmont and Cal Baptist are not Christian? Or would you say Notre Dame and Trinity College and Georgetown are not Christian? Obviously, the state schools and the prestigious schools are not Christian. So I'm going to use the term Adventist and secular, and hope that Point Loma people do not take offense. Another is college versus university. I'm not going to even try to unpack the difference between those. It's a bit prestigious. And youth. Oh, youth, the word youth, used in quotes, is so ambiguous because we can't treat a third grader the same as we do a graduate student. So any admonition about youth, we've got to unpack it a bit. One of the challenges that Adventism has, especially back in its formative years, was its planning horizon. And I'm going to use business language in much of this talk. But explicit or culturally intuitive, we had a very short planning horizon. And so as we discovered that we're going to be around for a while, we decided we would go after accreditation. We went from wooden buildings to stone buildings to steel frame, and if you look at some of the new construction at Loma Linda, ain't nothing gonna knock it down. It's really, really solid. And we decided, yeah, we will invest in faculty doctorates and invest in a broader range of higher education in general. And partly because we no longer use this expression at the end of sentences. If time should last. I'm going to go take a vacation in Yosemite next month, if time should last. We don't say that anymore. But we did for a lot of our history. So what's happened? What's the environment of education that's changed since 1925? Well, we took seriously accreditation, and that changes how we do education, and it changes our cost structure. The students now work under a minimum wage law. We encourage faculty to get doctorates. We have the GI Bill, which just about saved Adventist education after World War II, a tremendous influx of students with their expenses paid for. We have the distractions of radio and TV. Cheaper air travel makes every college a competitor with everyone else. This was not true 100 years ago. And personal computers, and I'll rag on that later. Funded research for some schools changes their source, some of their revenue. Web and fiber changes how we connect the campus. Our access to knowledge is changed by the web, and particularly Wikipedia and Google, and I have an entirely separate lecture I do about those. Distance learning, it is becoming an essential that we know how to do it. I'm not keen on it because I like eye contact with my students. The first time I had to do it was at Blue Cross of Iowa when some of the students were in Texas and somewhere in South Dakota, and I can't see them. I don't know if I'm getting across to them. I don't like distance learning. A generous weekend leave for students changes the nature of the campus on the weekend, changes the sense of community. Okay, Charles, when did La Sierra let the students out on weekends? Okay, you live in the village, you're oblivious to that kind of thing. And laptops in classroom. I sat in the back of a classroom to heckle the teacher a couple weeks ago, and there were 40 students. They all had tables. Half of them had their laptops open. Half of those were taking notes, and the other half were watching the basketball playoffs on Wi-Fi. W.W. Prescott would not have to put up with that. In fact, I don't think he would put up with it. In fact, I'm not sure why this teacher did, but I would not like it at all if I were teaching. The 1905 business model, so there was no competitive threat from Adventist schools. If you went to the state university or a secular school, as one head elder told me in Massachusetts, you're being disloyal. So there was no competition with peer Adventist schools. The quality of the facilities and instructions was not a competitive factor. And the business model now has changed enormously. And the old assumptions about non-competition are out the window. And our concept of mission, constituency, market, and strategy must be totally rethought. And I am really down on the blueprint. And I'll explain that more later. So the characteristics of early higher education was a short planning horizon, primitive facilities, strong, heroic devotion to the cause, an emphasis on entering the work. I have some numbers on that. An enormous amount of sacrifice, heroic sacrifice for the institution. Severely restricting student behavior. It's a wonder they got married. And men only in administration and ministerial dominance of the boards. Today, we have what I call the Beamer effect, where we have the parking lot full of BMWs of students who are infinitely richer than the students 100 years ago, and some of them are brats. We'll get to that later. I want to distinguish between process and outcomes in how we make decisions. And the original process blueprint, which comes from a lot of quotes from Ellen White, talked about techniques and speech and values and goals and rules. I want to take the goals at least and redefine the desirable outcomes that we should seek from Adventist higher education. And the first and foremost should be a faith-based belief and values. In other words, teaching, you can't make them believe it, but you can at least make them aware of it, of our historic and most credible beliefs and values. And to develop an in-faith social relationship, a network of friends, and maybe one friend becomes the spouse. That's cool. And also an attitude of altruism and service, particularly service within the denomination. We also want to instill in them professional competencies in whatever their major is, and we want to instill social competencies, and this is what I think is the goal of a liberal arts education, so they know where Iraq is, or they know who Darwin was. Also, we want to teach them some institutional loyalty, and this is now a criteria for evaluation for accreditation. How many of your graduates donate even $1 a year back to the institution? And I would hope that we teach them critical thinking. This is the most frightening of the goals because we can't predict what they're going to do, okay? And that means losing control. We want to accomplish all of this within budget and do no harm. In other words, don't alienate the students in the process, okay? Well, in a modern environment, we're going to have to look at how we accomplish these outcomes with modern techniques. That goal of denominational employment was very important, even through the 40s and the 50s. PUC 1957, they estimated that about 45% of their graduates were in denominational service, and 10%, or looks like 8% of those were in the mission field. And that was a big deal for Pacific Union College. For the time that the General Conference did track how many graduates were going into denominational service, we see a downward trend from a peak of 83% in 1930, running down to about 33% when they stopped tracking it in 1964. So we have this brick and mortar institutional model, but this permeates Adventism, and in fact it's a common thing in society in general, that the institution doesn't exist unless there's a campus there and something we can see and touch and feel and photograph. The only exception to that is Griggs University, which has been around for a long time. It used to be called Home Study Institute, I believe. If there isn't a campus you can see and touch, it doesn't exist. So there's no cognitive provision in the constituency and in some of the trustees for a virtual organization. And perhaps the most successful is something like eBay in the retail market. But virtual schools without any campus, they just exist in the Ethernet, are competing with us. And are you having Malin Coetzee come and talk about? Malin Coetzee? Yeah, he's coming. Or has he been here? Yeah, he's running a virtual school. So we have a network of colleges and universities. Loma Linda is the largest at 4,000. AUC is down to about 500 students, and Canadian Union College is a little bit smaller than that. I want to look at the world outside of Adventism for a little while, what the economic environment is like particularly. And the U.S. citizenry are getting richer in real terms. We have a much more educated workforce in the United States with a technology-driven economy, lots of efficiencies, low cost of energy so far. So the national income, which is almost a meaningless number when you're talking about $10 trillion, we need to normalize that by recognizing that that trend right there is diminished by dollar inflation and population growth, and what you have left is true gains in productivity. So the population has been growing since 1930, and we've had inflation growing since 1930. So when we divide, when we take out those factors, we still have U.S. citizens per capita being much richer than they were in 1930. And this represents true productivity gains. In real terms, each person can buy more. And if we express it in constant dollars that are adjusted for inflation, and we're using year 2000 dollars, we moved from $5,000 per capita to $38,000 per capita of earning power. So we are genuinely richer in America. How long that will continue, we don't know. The U.S. is becoming better educated, and since 1990, 75% of U.S. citizens or U.S. residents were high school graduates. It's moved up to 84%. The percentage of college graduates has moved from 20% to 27% just since 1990. That's fascinating. But we have made college education available to a much broader part of the citizenry. In that environment, when we look at the North American division enrollment in higher education, we went from 3,700 students at the start of the World War II, and we're now up to 24,000. And this is the graph that Spectrum published. But it is inherently deceiving because over this same period of time, the membership of the North American division was growing substantially. In fact, it grew to 10 times what it was in 1925. So if we divide the number of students by the number of members, we see that we peaked out at 40 students per 1,000 members in 1969, and it went down, and it's been about flat at 24 or 25 per 1,000 members since then. So what this tells me, given all the other environmental factors and the growth in enrollment elsewhere, this tells me that we are losing a lot of students to non-Adventist education. That's a 40% decline since 1969. So that was the unnormalized chart, and this is the adjusted for membership. Adventists are also becoming poorer on the average. In 1930, the tithe per member was 4.5% of the GDP per capita in the United States. And that kind of peaked out in 1960, and it's down to 1.9%. I'm using tithe per member as an estimator of what people earn, not their wealth, latent wealth, but their income wealth. So I feel fairly confident about this, and we can chalk it up not to a lower tithe ethic, but the fact that the North American membership is shifting to poorer demographic groups. So on the average, the NAD membership is getting poorer. Now, college enrollment is becoming more popular in the United States, and actually this is a staggering growth from 30 per 1,000 people to 60 per 1,000 people. And this isn't graduates, this is currently enrolled. So, and at the same time, membership, the Adventist enrollment has declined. The private four-year university college tuition has grown from 6,000, and this is in adjusted, in inflation-adjusted dollars, from 6,800 up to 24,000. Well, that's kind of hard to get our brain around, so we have to express it in some other way. And by the way, that's just tuition. The cost of food has gone up, the dorm room cost has gone up, so the total tuition, room, and board has gone from $11,000 to $32,000. Well, let's try a different way of getting our brain around that. But before I do that, I just took some schools that I know about, starting with Bowdoin College up in Brunswick, Maine. Their annual tuition is $39,600. Ouch. Grinnell College in Iowa, where Harry Hopkins graduated, is $36,000. University of San Diego is $36,000. Harvard is only $33,000, a real bargain. The U.S. average is $28,000. Point Loma here is $25,000. Loma Linda School of Allied Health Profession, the base tuition is $24,300. PUC is cheaper. La Sierra is down at $23,000. And then Cal Baptist in Riverside is down to $21,000. Then Union College, if you want a bargain, go to Union, $16,000. Or Southern, or the real bargain is $14,900 at AUC. And then if you live in California, you can go to UC San Diego for just $8,700. This is tuition only. So there's a great disparity. But we are not the most expensive schools out there. Okay? Another way to understand the burden of tuition is to understand how many hours a student would have to work at minimum wage to pay off the tuition. And we're just talking about tuition. And in 1970, it took, is that your projector? I still have a, I noticed something was different. No, I'm looking at it. Okay. I shouldn't tell you this, but I brought a little projector in the car if we're desperate. Because I am a belt and suspenders pessimist. Okay. Yeah, let's do that. Okay, we're going to stop the recording for a moment. Okay, we lost a projector, so we had to bring in an alternate projector. And I just happened to have one in my car. Pessimist that I am. So, a student working 40 hours a week, assume no tax, had to work 28 weeks to pay for tuition at La Sierra. No, this is national average of four-year colleges. Had to work 28 weeks in 1970 to pay for the tuition. That's 40 hours a week, no taxes. In 2006, that same student, and if you don't want to think about a student, think about a single mom working at minimum wage, 131 weeks, 2.5 years of labor to pay for 1 year of tuition. That is a decline in affordability. Okay, La Sierra tuition, and this is the only data that I had where I could track it since 1970, has actually lagged behind the national average for four-year colleges up until just a few years ago, and then they're starting to catch up. Okay, so tuition is still awfully high. If you express it as a percentage of the median household income, again, before tax, in 1970, a household that sent their child to college had to pay 33% of their median household income just to tuition. Now it's up to 75%. So college is not very affordable now. And the impact, and Dick Osborne asked me to stress this, the impact of high college tuition is that when students, it's driving students to state-funded universities because of the lower tuition. Those who attend Adventist schools incur a staggering debt, and as they approach their senior year and are looking at the amount of debt that they have, it causes them to reconsider their career choices towards higher salary options outside of the church and away from denominational service. So that is one of the consequences of the high tuition. Now I want to focus on enrollment volatility, and this is what I originally jumped into when, this is where it all started, when I got the enrollment data off from the General Conference website, and I was starting to see this kind of volatility. Pacific Union College offers a very interesting example. In 1977, they peaked off at 2,400 enrollment, and then they went, over a period of 9 years, they went through a 40% loss of enrollment. You cannot run a college with that going on. You cannot do capital planning. You cannot decide whether to hire teachers when you're experiencing that kind of a decline. And actually, let's look at this a little bit closer. As that was going on, in 1970, they had, 1,900 students, and they had 131 faculty. They went up to that peak, and the faculty level was fairly stable. And then they went through the decline, but the number of faculty did not decline. So at that peak, they had a 16-to-1 faculty to student-to-faculty ratio, and it came down to 8-to-1 student-to-faculty ratio. Now, that would normally be a prestigious school, but they could not afford that, okay? So then we see that in, 1985, they started to either stop hiring faculty and letting people retire. The number of faculty you have is flexible upward and inflexible downward, quite frankly. Southern Adventist University hit a peak of 2,000 in 1980 and then took a 30% loss over a period of about 8 years. Now, we could blame it on the administration, but I'm not going to go there. But here was an article about one, this was actually, they cut Bob Sage, and he was only contract teacher, so he didn't have any kind of protection, and he went to teach somewhere else. I'm not going to talk about that. Walla Walla experienced a similar drop in 1975, 35% loss down to their lowest point in 1986. Columbia Union College, on the other hand, saw their enrollment jump from 704 up to 1,300 in a period of 2 years. Now, that's a different kind of problem. You got to scramble to provide the marginal or the incremental facilities for those kind of people. Atlantic Union College is just below 500 enrollment, which is not much different than it was at the end of World War II, but it has gone up and down in that period of time. Did you know AUC also offered master's degrees for a while? Okay. Kettering is showing solid growth, and of course the spectacular one is Florida Hospital College of Health Sciences, which was down below 400 in the early 1990s, is now up to 2,200 enrollment. We'll talk more about that in a bit. SDA academies are important feeder schools to the higher education system, and they're experiencing declining enrollment, and many of them have closed. In fact, here's just some of the academies that have closed over the past 40 years. But that should not surprise us, because we actually closed 3 seminaries back in the 1930s and 1920s. Did you know we had 3 language-specific seminaries in the Midwest? And anyway, the total North American Division Academy enrollment peaked out at 20,000 back in 1980 and has declined and been somewhat flat around 12,000 to 14,000 since then. But again, that was raw numbers. If we divide it by the membership, We had 43 students per 1,000 members at the peak in about 1968, and it has come down to 16 students per 1,000 members, okay? So that is a significant decline. Many of you are familiar with the situation at San Diego Academy. It peaked out at 236 and has experienced a 77% loss in enrollment over a period of 24 years. Now, when you stretch out the decline over that amount of time, you have more options in how you manage your faculty level. So let's go further up the supply chain and look at elementary enrollment. And I just did this last week for Dr. Kiddo. And it peaked out at 54,000 back in 1975, and it's down to 41,000 across the North American division. But again, the membership has been growing. So if we look at the number of elementary students per 1,000 members, it went from 13 in 1960 down to 3.9 today. So significant decline in enrollment. All this time, and I've alluded to demographic changes, and I mentioned how the membership of the Adventist Church in North America is becoming poorer. And this is particularly interesting to watch in the California conferences. We had a situation in the Southern California Conference where in 1945, 1950, the conference was taking in a tithe per member rate 43% above the national average. The Southern California Conference was awash in tithe money, and they generally assigned 2 pastors to every church, no matter how small. Lately, especially in the year 2000, the Southern California Conference had a tithe per member that was 25% below the national average. Okay, so the demographics and the income level of the Southern California Conference in Los Angeles has changed substantially. Now that uptick at the end is because they're starting to purge their books of inactive members, and it changes the denominator. The Southeastern California Conference was 33% above the national average in 1945. Now it's about 13% below the national average. So this conference is poorer. I would hate to be a college president, and there are a lot of people that chose not to be college presidents when a vacancy opened up north for a variety of reasons. But part of the challenge of being a college president is that you are pulled in so many directions by so many constituencies. You have the legal constituency, and they choose the board of trustees and all that. You have, in a sense, a constituency of prospective students and their families. You have donors who have an interest in the success of the college as well as alumni. You have the geographic community that has a stake in it, the economic community, and the emotional community. The emotional community are people that say, my school, our school. You have prospective employers that are interested in, particularly the denomination, interested in the quality of the graduates you put out. The government is now taking an interest in it, and we have more government reporting that we have to do. And finally, the faculty and staff have a vested interest in the success and, if not growth, of the college or university. So you're tugged in a lot of directions, and not all of these constituencies have the same goals and values. And this doesn't even consider the theological splits that I'll touch on later. So the factors contributing to the current situation in the denomination in higher education, I'm just going to identify 10 factors. First is the higher base cost to run a school, not tuition, but the cost of running a school. The second are the secular universities and their accommodating of religious behavior. The third is the shifting NAD demographics. We are seeing students with lower entry skills. That adds to the cost of running a college. There's program proliferation, and I will be I'll talk about that in a minute. School fragmentation, I think, wastes a lot of resources. Enrollment volatility, I've shown you how that can hurt. Theological and philosophical diversity, and finally, the nostalgia and sentimentality that goes into decision making. And of course, the union conference silos. The first is the base cost of running a college. We have new demands of accreditation. We have information technology that we have to have in place or people won't take us seriously. There's greater government reporting requirements, so you have to have an Office of Institutional Research. We do more in advancement and fundraising. We're recruiting in a very competitive market, so we have to have more recruiters. And then we have this pre-foundational instruction. When I attended La Sierra, and I think back as precisely as I can in looking at the administrative overhead, we saw, for example, 1.5 headcount in public relations, and perhaps 3 in recruiting and admissions. Today, recruiting and admissions has at least 11 recruiters, and that doesn't include the office staff. Of course, the office of the registrar and everything. We have 9 people in advancement now, but I don't worry about that because that is a cost center and they're bringing in more money than they cost. But we also have whole new bureaucracies that we didn't have 40, 50 years ago. The Center for Student Academic Success, the Honors Program, the OIR, Disability Services, Service Learning, and International Students. And this is just an example. At Pacific Union College, they have a staff of 14 people just doing IT. None of that existed 50 years ago. So the overhead of running a college or a university is substantially greater. Then there is the competition, and secular colleges are much more attractive because Sabbath, for example, is less of a problem. And even when I was at UCLA, I had an exam scheduled on Friday night. And I went to the professor and I explained my faith and I explained the situation. And he arranged for me to take it on Friday afternoon. I was out of there by 6 o'clock. That's good. And in fact, the climate of education and of a lot of businesses in general is much more aware of unique religious behavior and needs and much more accommodating. So after comparing costs, public schools or community colleges, state universities become a much more attractive option. This is a list of just some of the schools that I know of people that I know, children of Adventist ministers, Adventist educators, and Adventist leaders. This is where their children went to school. Point Loma, Harvard, Trinity, Claremont. One dean, his daughter took her MBA at Sloan School of Management at MIT. I'm proud of her. I think it's terrific. They perceived quality rather than going to any of the 3 MBA programs here in the Adventist network. Okay? We talked about the shifting NAD demographics, more members coming from lower income groups, fewer members. Households are classic nuclear families, so you have a lot of single parent households, and they find college expenses more difficult. We're seeing lower entry skills compared to 40 years ago, less preparation for college work, deficiencies in math, writing, and study skills. This is a national phenomenon. It's not just unique to Adventist schools. But this places a burden upon the college, and they don't use the word remedial anymore. It's pre-foundational. Don't you love that? Okay, and this is a tough question for the boards and the leadership of the schools, because you have students with high academic and professional potential, and some students with low potential. And you have students with high study and math and language skills, and some with low. And I think if we could imagine that both of those are normal distributions, we could see the cross of these 2 vectors in this way. Which of these students do you want to really bring into your school? All of them, ideally. But one trustee at La Sierra told me how they're targeting students in this quadrant, this lower right quadrant, and trying to bring them up because they have good potential, but they have rotten study skills and rotten inadequate language and math skills right now. And there is kind of the justification for the pre-foundational instruction, but that costs additional money. The faculty lament I'm hearing at Loma Linda is lower skills levels, horrible writing skills, and this is both in U.S. students and foreign board, and the lack of the work ethic. I teach economics occasionally at Loma Linda. Is this going to be on the test? No, but if you're going to be a professional, you better know it. Okay? And lower critical thinking skills. So I'm hearing this from an awful lot of faculty. One of my complaints, and I've been seeing this for a long time, is program proliferation. The creation of programs for which there aren't enough students or where the jobs aren't at the other end of the pipeline when you graduate. And there was an interesting New York Times op-ed piece, April 27, by Mark Taylor about producing all these PhDs that are totally unemployable. Okay? And that may be applied to some master's programs. And so we have to ask, and this is, I think, in the academic DNA, that we want to start a new program. Every teacher that's just teaching undergraduate wants to do a graduate program. Well, there's several criteria. And one of the criteria is how much capital investment is a program going to require. The second one that I believe is important is whether or not it has Adventism influences the content of that program. And I'm having a debate with Lisa Beardsley about this. I have enormous respect for her, but she, in the Spectrum article, she said we don't need fewer schools, we need more. And as an example, she said we ought to have a film theater arts, cinema arts school somewhere in the Los Angeles area. Well, let's think about that. In the high Adventist content, low capital investment, upper left quadrant, we have religion and education. Pretty much, particularly with religion, all you need is a classroom and a library. You don't need a lot of lab facilities. Wouldn't religion be interesting if we did labs? Okay. Biology has a high Adventist component, but it does require some lab facilities. Then math, English, and history are, again, not much of a capital investment to make them happen, but they don't also have much of an Adventist component. You don't teach math differently in an Adventist school, to my knowledge. There may be some people who will try, than you do in a secular school. Modern languages, of course, require some kind of capital investment in the labs. In the upper right quadrant, we have all the medical skills. And these are, and this is one thing I like about Loma Linda, is we are producing compassionate, competent professionals. But our faith is bringing to them a sense of altruism and a sense of compassion, which we hope they enact as they see patients. But to give them proper training, there's a high capital investment in both faculty and facilities, as well as your network of clinical experience in adjacent hospitals. Somewhere in the middle of this is social work, psychology. The main investment there is the network, again, of clinical facilities. Physics and chemistry, Adventism doesn't have much to say to physics, but it does require some capital investment. My absurd lower right quadrant is opera. If an Adventist music teacher got a bee in his bonnet to start an opera program, and if I were on the board of trustees, I would say, high capital investment, not much unique of Adventism to speak to that. And by high capital investment, you can't do credible opera without having a whole bunch of skill sets and lighting and set design and a large staff to pull it off. It's terribly expensive to do. Should we be doing opera? I don't think so. And this is the criteria I would bring to that decision. Pharmacy and industrial arts is somewhere there in the middle. So if someone wants to start a program, I think the evaluation criteria, and this is what I wish trustees would use, is first of all, what is the general market for this program, and is it sustainable? What is the SDA institutional need for this skill? Because we have two sets of markets now, the institutional market and the non-Adventist market. What is the competition? What schools already teach it? Are there enough students to reach a break-even point? And I won't go into the financial model of how you reconcile your stepwise costs and your linear costs. What portion of students will be Adventist? Does that make a difference in whether you try to do the program? Because what we have found is non-Adventist graduates are less likely to donate back to their alma mater. What portion of graduates will actually go to church institutions? Can you find qualified teachers to do this? And what percentage of them will be SDA? Can you sustain the program over the long term? And I forget who told me to ask this. I think it was Malin Coutts. He said, what happens if you don't do it? Which is a great question. You want to start a new program that's going to cost me a lot of money. What happens if I don't do it? Okay? And this is important to me personally because I come on campus to lecture. And when I walk into a classroom and there are just 3 students in a graduate program, when there should be 15, I'm kind of discouraged. Why are we even trying to do this if there's just 3 students? Okay? Now, some graduate PhD programs, yeah, you may have a cohort of just 3 students, but that's awfully expensive. Inter-school fragmentation. This is particularly interesting to see at Loma Linda, where each school wants its own computer lab and student lounge and assistant dean for this and that. And what that does is drive up costs, and I see a lot of idle capital sitting around unused. That bothers me. Loma Linda tends to be a multiversity rather than a university, but people will debate that. Enrollment volatility we've talked about. You can't do long-term capital and human investment without some kind of stability of enrollment, and that's at the school, at the department, and at the program level. You can't have programs or departments having highly volatile enrollment. So good capital planning requires stability for buildings and classrooms, for hiring a good faculty. And as I said before, faculty levels are flexible upwards, but inflexible downward. Then there's, what am I talking about? Theological diversity. As I said in my talk the last time I was here at San Diego, theology in Adventism is becoming more diverse. You are having more militant conservatives or orthodox and less and liberals that define Adventism the way they want. So when you have that much more diversity now than you had 100 years ago, there's an inescapable tension between this broad range of ideas. For example, about liberal arts education. And so at one extreme, you have people that say we should teach English but with nonfiction only and very concrete interpretation. Whereas at the other extreme, where it's a broad range of fiction studied with rich symbolism, metaphor, and life's passions embraced. Passion is a word that is very scary to some conservatives. In the origins of life, at one extreme there's the short chronology and the literal 7-day creation, and at the other extreme of thought in the academic community are long chronologies and concepts of evolution and natural selection. So these are just 2 of areas where there is a great diversity of belief in Adventism, and the school becomes the battleground for those issues. There is also an anti-educational sentiment in Adventism. Training, yes. Education, no. Why, the only literature you need is the Bible and the writings of Sister White. Have you ever heard that? Okay. The people who love primitive religion are not ready to line up for primitive dentistry. Okay. Every college has devoted and protective alumni, and they are fiercely militant in protecting that college, especially if you construct a new building with a donor's name. And if it's gone up in the past 10 years, ain't nobody going to touch that and close that down. And so this kind of perpetuates the dilemma that we can't close this school. We have too much of an emotional investment in it. Okay? And then, of course, there's the union conference barriers. The school system we have today exists because of the union conference structure, and every union conference built its own school. The walls used to be much more severe, but now the recruiters tell me that there's a lot of collaboration among the schools, and I'm very happy to hear that. My recommendations are a more specific mission statement for the school. Think in terms of desired outcomes rather than processes. Examine the funding options, more aggressive and clever yield management, an improved board of trustees. I'm going to get heat on that. Higher asset utilization, and there are ways to do that, and reevaluate traditional historic drivers to our school. First of all, we've got to create better mission statements, and they have to be specific and talk more about outcomes than the processes. And the processes are loaded with symbolic value and emotive value, but we have to look at the outcomes. And it should name, and this is where it's going to get dicey, we should name the constituencies we're going to serve and identify the constituencies we're not going to serve. And that's hard, okay? But most of all, we need to shift from processes to outcomes. The outcomes I've talked about, we want the students to stay in the church, find marriage partners in the church, inclined to work for the denomination, have professional competency. So we've talked about that. One of the scariest questions is, can we accomplish these without an Adventist school system? And I say it's possible, but not for all students. Okay? If we have time, we'll hit that in the Q&A. Right now, the primary sources of funding for the typical college, most of it comes from tuition. There's some church subsidies, donations for operations. Some schools get some money from research grants from the federal government, like National Institute of Health or something like that. La Sierra just applied for a $2.6 million grant for giving particular assistance to Hispanic students. That's $2.6 million over a 5-year period. I don't know if we're going to get that, but we sure worked hard applying for it. And earnings on endowment. Now, endowment is an interesting concept. We didn't use that word 50 years ago. Endowment means you have to have self-discipline, not to spend it all at once, to put it away and then use the earnings. But again, that gets us back to the planning horizon. Now, this is a typical college. With its anticipated enrollment, it can project that it will have a tuition revenue of $31 million. That's number of students that we hope to get times full tuition. But what the college does to attract those students is to offer discounts totaling $8.4 million. And this is what shows up on the books of the school. So the net tuition cash revenue is going to be only $22 million. And that comes from family sources and from any grants or scholarships that are external to the school. You add to that a $3.3 million subsidy from the Union Conference, and you basically have a total operating revenue of $26 million, which you can spend on academic instruction and support, student services, and the overhead. Now, those boxes on the right aren't proportional to how much they actually are. This was a 2007 figure for one college. Well, some ways to mitigate the enrollment volatility is yield management, and we don't know any other term to use for this, and I don't know what the recruiters use. But we can also grow non-tuition revenue sources. We can establish enrollment as a smaller percent of applications, which means generate more applications. Vary your dip into the marginal applications, maybe have the original acceptances and then some other acceptances later. Actively recruit hard-to-find Adventists. There are all kinds of Adventist students who went to public high schools, and they're not on the radar of the conference or the union conference. Actively recruit non-Adventist students, and this has proven successful for a number of schools. Yield management means maximizing your applications and selecting the best applicants and encouraging them to show up. And but there are risks to yield management and discounting. And the highest risk is that you'll miss your revenue goal. And of course, yield management wasn't done 30 years ago, but there's also risking alienating students, just like on an airplane. If two people compare their ticket costs when they're sitting next to them, one of them's angry. Okay? The same thing could happen with students. Now, a lot of colleges are pursuing a policy of means-blind acceptance, which means they accept people based on their academic performance and potential without looking at whether they can afford to go to school there. And then they wrestle with the financing problem later. Let's look at some examples. Massachusetts Institute of Technology, 13,600 applicants. They accept only 11% of them. And of those accepted, 65% show up. Now, between acceptance and showing up is all this negotiation about the discount and that. Whereas Walla Walla University accepts 98% of its applicants, and of those, 71% show up. Point Loma down here accepts 75%, 42% show up. That would scare me, that only 42% of my acceptances actually show. Yale accepts only 8.4%, and 68% of them show up. Union College accepted, this is amazing, 45%. They only accepted 45% of their applicants, and 51% of them show up. Pacific Union College accepted 77%, and 25% show up. So, here's another two-dimensional matrix. I love doing this kind of stuff, and it just drives people nuts. On the left is very selective, and on the right is inclusive. And on the vertical matrix dimension, we have high yield or low yield, or high level of show up or low level of show up. And so hard to get into to the left and easy to get into to the right. In the upper left quadrant, we have, let's start with the Adventist schools. Walla Walla is in the upper right quadrant. Union is right in the center. PUC is in the lower right. And Florida Hospital is over there on the right. That is fairly easy to get into. Whereas your Ivy League schools, Harvard, MIT, Stanford, are in the upper left quadrant. That's really where you want to be. You want to have a lot of applications to choose from, and then just package the best class cohort that you can put together. Basically, there's constant student flow in the Adventist community between Adventist academies and non-Adventist high schools, and so when we're trying to attract them to college, an Adventist college will draw from academy students and high school students, but we know some of the academy students are going to go to Harvard and Yale and places like that. Some of them go to junior colleges for the first couple of years, and then we hope we can bring them in and still attract them to the Adventist college. And you have the same kind of flows going into graduate school. So we need to get a handle on each of these flows, but a tremendous potential source lies outside of the Adventist community. And these are non-Adventist students that we can attract to our Adventist colleges and our Adventist graduate programs. The percentage of students who are Adventists varies significantly across the country. Southwest in Keene has 95% of its students Adventist. The national average is 57%, but that is really influenced by the three health-related schools. Kettering has 9.6% of its students Adventist. Florida has 15 or 16%, and Loma Linda has 46% of the overall student body is Adventist. And Loma Linda I was able to track since 1992. It has dropped from 56 to 46% Adventist. I don't think that's a problem. I would be, quite frankly, I'm much happier with even some Muslim students than some brat Adventists. Okay? I can expand on that in the Q&A. Be careful what you measure when at the General Conference Office of Statistics put out in their questionnaire to measure non-Adventist faculty, and it's actually kind of surprising. In the NAD colleges, these are the numbers they were reporting up until 2007. They were reporting that about 26% of the faculty were non-Adventist. That amazes me. And I have to go back and look at the individual. The final problem is decision makers. I'm going to go through this real quickly. The ultimate decision makers, the board of trustees and the chairman of and the president. And of course, you understand the structure. There's a legal constituency that selects the college trustees, who ratify or select the president, who ratifies or selects the provost. But there are all kinds of decision influencers beyond the legal constituency. And I had an article I published in Adventist today about what I want in competent board members, and it starts with general business acumen, knowledge and skills. They ought to understand enough about accounting to know the difference between capital and operating funds. And if they don't understand that, they shouldn't be on the board of trustees, as far as I'm concerned. I'm kind of hard-nosed about that. I will never be asked to be on trustees. All kinds of business issues, finance, personal administration. They should understand the education industry, not necessarily reading the Chronicle every week, but they should have intelligence and critical thinking skills. They should understand the difference between quantitative metrics and anecdotes, between the numbers, the kind of numbers I've been showing you, and the feel-good stories that are produced by the public relations machine. They should have independence and lack of conflict of interest, courage and communication skills, and willingness to serve, and they should have some world savvy. They should recognize and avoid God talk. I think in my talk today you do not hear me using God talk. I'm speaking as a business person. They should understand the basics of web and distance learning, a whole bunch of issues, the demographics of the Adventist market. They ought to get outside of the church that they attend and see what the rest of Adventism looks like. There's always this tension between vision and hope and pragmatism. So there are risk takers and there are cautious people, and you find this even on church boards. I would suggest reaching out to the geographic community. La Sierra does this very well. You can attend meetings on the La Sierra campus where the room is full of the movers and shakers of the city of Riverside. That's a good thing. That they know where the campus is. They know how to find the alumni center. But it undermines campus purity, because heaven forbid one of them might go out and take a smoke. Okay? We can boost enrollment from outside Adventism, and I talked about how happy I am to see Nazarene and Baptist on the Loma Linda campus. Loma Linda is very good at this. We should be better at asset utilization. I won't talk about that. We should legitimize and well, that's a whole other topic, and maybe we'll touch that during the Q&A. What we need is a BRAC. Some independent commission to decide by some agreed upon criteria which college we should close. I'm not going to say today which college we should close. We close churches, we close academies. Why can't we close a college? Because right now, the current structure of the North American division, constituencies and the patterns of control will not solve the problem. They've known about the problem for a long time, and they have not solved it. So I would rather close a school deliberately with a 5 to 10 year planning horizon, let the faculty know what their future is going to be, rather than have the school close catastrophically, suddenly, because of bankruptcy. Let's get something to eat.